So when we had you on last time, you talk about how there's hegemonic powers and periphery states to those. And the big hegemonic powers are obviously the U.S. and China. Since we last had you on, how do you think the balance of power has shifted between the U.S. and China with various periphery states?
And for clarity, it's been about 3.5 years. We had you on in early 2021. This is a long time.
It's quite a while, yes. Well, Russia is still sanctioned, and it's still, quite vengeful against the West. And so without Russia, China wouldn't be doing half the stuff it's doing now, I think. Russia really is propping up China, being like, come on, China, do more. Come on, do more. Come on, I'm with you, do more. You know what I mean? Russia is, I think, China's battering ram, especially on the military front, where China is quite hesitant to take part. So Russia's crude oil trade in the yuan helps China. Russia within the BRICS also helps China. Russia's really keen on stripping away power from the West so that it can, reassert itself on the world stage and degrade any Western obstacles to its own strategic interests. So really, the main villain of this story is not really China, it's Russia, I think.
Interesting.
I have a question about the, education cooperation and the sort of ideological influence that China is having in Pakistan, which is, the People's Republic of China is a communist country. It's an atheist country. The Islamic Republic of Pakistan is, at least in name, Islamic and culturally Islamic, if not always religiously Islamic. But there seems to be inherently a potential conflict there. But are we seeing that conflict?
We're seeing the conflict in terms of, as I said, certain pockets within Pakistan only accessible to Chinese because of a potential clash between norms and values. However, the diplomats and personnel who are dispatched to Pakistan are given sensitivity training. The women are told to dress a certain way. The men are told that you won't be able to eat pork. China has to do these to make sure that there's no incidents. What's unfortunate and ironic to me is that China has been brutal with its Muslim population, especially in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, and it's also destroyed some mosques within China for the Muslim populations outside Xinjiang. And the Pakistani government has not really condemned it. But it's not just Pakistan. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, they've all kind of shied away from condemning China's, I'm going to say, anti-Muslim or anti-Islam maneuvers because of trade and because of other economic and geostrategic perks that they would otherwise receive. Now, in terms of education, I don't think that there's like a communism propagation apparatus, at least just yet, in terms of Pakistan at least, precisely because it would have to start at a very, very young age. And so far, the schools in Pakistan have not done so. The Mandarin is now mandatory in many of Pakistan's elementary schools, but not Chinese history or Marxism or whatever Chinese students would grow up learning.
Well, my experience studying Mandarin is that it's not possible to learn the language without learning some of the cultural factors and cultural influence. And I certainly found a difference between professors I had who were Taiwanese versus mainlanders in terms of what they'd be comfortable talking about or certain ideas about China's development. Certainly, I had one mainland professor who was, I would just say she was very uncomfortable when a student came in and she like brought slides of this like Asian event she went to. And like there were people who were like Falun Gong with their banners, and there was like other things that were just like very, like she didn't want to talk about it. She shut down the discussion, right? So it kind of for a college student, you can kind of see what's going on and laugh about it. But for an elementary school student, you're going to get some influence. And where are these Mandarin teachers coming from? They're probably largely not Pakistani, right? They're probably coming in from China. So Chinese mainlanders who themselves are educated under communism coming into Pakistan to teach Mandarin from their own perspectives to these Pakistani children, right?
Yes, that's a great point. I didn't really think about the certain side effects of Mandarin acquisition. Um, I'm not really sure how these would play out in Pakistani classrooms because actually, one of the largest schools in Pakistan, called the City School, which has over 150 schools in Pakistani cities and over 150,000 Pakistani students, um, these have a UK curriculum. However,
Right.
they do have it on their website that Mandarin is the language to learn, is the language of the future, and is the language. It's the most spoken language in the world. So imagine a UK school or UK curriculum school is propagating this as fact. Um, so I do think that there'd be a bit more supervision in this regard, especially because students in Pakistan would also have to learn um, Islamic theology, which may not mesh very well with whatever you mentioned about Mandarin acquisition from a mainlander. And I do think the teachers coming in to teach that know that they're up against a hurdle if they're gonna convince the school board and the parents to accept anything that's not compatible with Islam, and B, expect that the students will just learn quickly these values and ideologies and still be, in accordance with Islam as they see it.
Well, I guess also after this conversation, I guess I always assumed that like Islamic countries that are not criticizing China for its anti-Muslim activities, particularly the genocide of the Uyghurs, were just being hypocritical. But I guess there's also a possibility that they have also just been victims of propaganda. That, like, if you are already in a position where you suspect the U.S. of lying about everything, and then you have China come in with propaganda saying, oh no, we have all these happy ethnic minorities. Here is a Uyghur to talk about how free they are to practice Islam. It could be that they just don't really know the real situation.
Well, you have the governments and you have the people, and unfortunately, for example, in the Gulf, there are monarchies that are not really interested in what the people think about these things. I think the monarchies are ruled by very calculating, rational people who see that the overall maneuvers in their interest are not to critique China in this regard because it will foment friction in economic cooperation with them, and that is they might think that it's to the benefit of Muslims as a whole to maintain good relations with China, even though it is harming a percentage of them of a few. So the whole is greater than the few. Needs of the whole are greater than needs of the few, so on and so forth. On the people level, I do think it would be hard to convince someone who sees what's happening in Xinjiang that China is not an ally to Islam or to Muslims. Um, However, now of all times, with the Gaza genocide going on, it would be hard to convince anyone that China is as bad as the powers uh, supporting Israel and as Netanyahu himself. So it's like Muslims also, just like the U.S., we have to choose the lesser of two evils at some point.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about the world in terms of like these hegemonic powers because it's not like I guess maybe the simplified version of how we're taught about European colonialism, where it's, the military goes in and takes over. There are all these different fronts for influencing periphery states. And it seems like China understands the reality of what's happening and is actually planning strategically to make these inroads,
It's actually
whereas the
very
West
interesting.
is not.
Yes, it's actually very interesting that you say that. There's a Chinese official who is responsible for media cooperation with Pakistan. And he is quoted as saying something to the effect of, we understand the power of English, we understand the power of blue jeans and rock music, and we want to have that power with Mandarin. We want to have that cultural imprinting of our ideology through Mandarin. China doesn't have an 80s moment. You can't name an 80s, pop hit by China. Whereas you can, of course, in the English language, maybe in Spanish, less so in French. But culture is really where China is weakest the most. And that is something they're very aware of, and they're trying to fix it as much as they can. That's why they've embarked on these cultural campaigns on social media in Pakistan, and also in terms of movies. Actually, here in Lebanon, I was surprised to find my youngest sister, Asmahan, watching a children's show in Mandarin, and she was following it. I was like, "What? This is unprecedented for me." I grew up watching Cartoon Network and stuff like that, and there she is, just in the kitchen on her phone, watching a Mandarin children's show, and she seemed to have no problem with it. It was entertaining enough for her, and I'd be very happy if my youngest sister, grew up to be a Mandarin speaker. So China's really it's studied how the West has achieved what it has, and it wants the same thing.